Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of Second Kings. Today we're in Second Kings chapter 5, and here we read about a general that is not a member of the Israelite army. He is not even an Israelite at all, and his name is Naaman. Naaman is going to be the general of the Syrian army to the north. And his interaction with Elisha here in chapter 5 is one that is very interesting, but also one that is going to give us a great deal to think about and a great deal to consider in our own studies of application. So let's look at some things concerning Naaman as we examine chapter 5 today. First of all, when you look at Naaman, it helps at the beginning to notice his character because his character is going to be a very important part of everything else that is going to happen. Naaman is the commander of the army. But as the commander of the army in Syria, he is described in verse 1 as being a man of a great and honorable man. He is a man of high character. He is a man who is highly regarded. He is a man that the king of Syria greatly respects because by him the Lord had given great victories to Syria. So here in Naaman, you have a man who is highly respected. He is an honorable man. He is a man of integrity. And he is a man that has everything going for him with the exception of one thing. He is a leper. Now, the idea of leprosy, if you go back to the Old Testament, is one that has a varied application. It doesn't all mean the leprosy in the medical term the way we would use it today, but it simply means it can simply mean a blemish or something that is wrong with his skin as far as that goes. And so it doesn't necessarily mean the rotting of the skin that we would normally think of. But there are other means that it could possibly refer to as well. But no matter which way it was, Naaman is a leper. So with all of this high character, all of this high respect, his high position, he still has this major issue when it comes to his physical appearance. And so he is going to be told to go to Elisha. Now, we could take 30 or 40 minutes just delving into all of the little intricacies of the things that play out here, but we're not going to take the time to do it in that way today. But having read the account, he goes down to Elisha. The king sends him to the king of Israel. The king of Israel thinks this is all ridiculous and sends him out, and he goes to Elisha. And Elisha is going to tell him to go and to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. And it is here that we see Naaman's initial reaction. His initial reaction is one of anger, because Naaman had it in his mind that Elisha was going to ask him to do some great deed, that he was going to make him pay some exorbitant sum of money, or that he was going to say or do something that would just immediately take care of it without Naaman having to do anything. All of those things were things Naaman had thought about, and yet Elisha's going to tell him to go and to wash himself in the muddy Jordan River, when there are much cleaner, much greater rivers in Syria than the Jordan River. So what makes the Jordan River so special? You see, Naaman here has an issue that oftentimes people have when it comes to responding to God, and that is they already have their own idea of what God is going to ask them to do, or what it is they're going to be willing to do in the service of God. But when they start reading God's word and they find that God expects them to do something different than what they've expected, or different than what others have told them, or different than what they were prepared to do, they become angry and they fight against it, which is exactly what Naaman is going to do. Naaman goes off in a rage because of what Elisha has asked him to do. And yet it's not until his servants come to him and say, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you have done it? How much more then when he says simply wash and be clean? You know, there's something to be said today for those who fight so hard against the New Testament dictates of salvation. They want to do it their own way. They want to do it the way they have always been told that it is, instead of the way that God said. Naaman is going to turn, and he is going to go back, and he is going to wash 7 times in the river Jordan, and he is going to be cleansed. When that happens, we find something very interesting, or at least I find something uniquely interesting beginning in verse number 17. Because when Naaman comes back to Elisha, he offers to give him gifts, and Elisha refuses to take them. But then you read in verse 17 that Naaman says, "If not, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord." He asks for ground of Israel to be able to take back with him. And he says, "I will no longer offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to other gods, but only to the Lord." But then he asks for understanding. He says, "I hope the Lord will pardon your servant when your servant is required to go into the temple of Rimmon because my master goes there to worship." You see, the general of Syria has an issue because the king of Syria does not believe in God. The king of Syria goes and worships at the temple of Rimmon. As a general of the king and as one of the inner circle of the king, Naaman is going to be expected to walk into that temple with the king of Syria. Now, Naaman tells Elisha and he tells God, "I do not go with the intention of worship. I go because it is what is expected of me for my work, for my job." And Elisha tells him to go in peace. Naaman says, "I am from this point forward devoted to God, but there are responsibilities that I must uphold." I know several individuals that are Christians that work in government situations where they are required to go into religious buildings or buildings of religious groups that they would never normally walk into, but they do so because it is a part of their job in dealing with certain individuals or in being there with certain individuals for various reasons. Here, Naaman gives us a measure of his devotion, but he also gives us a lesson in Elisha's response of the fact that this individual was able to walk in there and not be condemned for it because it was expected of him for his job, but also not be one who then joined in with what it was that was being done in offering sacrifices to these idols. So there are several different things that we learn about Naaman. We see his character. We see his anger when things do not go the way he thought they were going to go. We see his devotion. There are a lot of other things we could talk about. We did not even have the opportunity to get into today the situation with Gehazi, where Gehazi will, for all intents and purposes, lie, cheat, and steal in trying to receive the gifts that Elisha had refused. But I hope that this will whet your appetite to study 2 Kings chapter 5 further. These are things that I think are very important for us to see from their application to us today. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at 2 Kings chapter 6. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.